In most places, death means silence, tears, and black clothing. But in one ancient city, death triggers fireworks, dancing, and celebration, and locals say it's the luckiest thing that can happen to you. Right now, as you watch this, there's a fire burning on the banks of the Ganges River in India that has never been extinguished. Not once. Not in 3,500 years. And every single day, 165 people die, hoping their body will burn in those flames. This is Varanasi, where dying isn't feared. It's planned for. And what I discovered about this place will change how you think about death forever. Over 60,000 bodies are cremated in Varanasi every year. That's 165 people per day, burned on public ghats, stone steps leading down to the river while tourists take photos 50 feet away. But here's what makes it strange. These aren't sudden deaths. They're not accidents. People travel here to die. Imagine planning your death like you plan a vacation. Booking your spot, choosing your date, packing your bags knowing you'll never unpack them. Families sell ancestral homes to afford it. The elderly refuse cancer treatment because they'd rather die here than survive somewhere else. But why would anyone want to die in this place? The answer lies in a belief so powerful that millions have spent their entire lives and their families' entire savings chasing it. Varanasi is considered the oldest continuously inhabited city on Earth. Over 3,000 years old. It's mentioned in ancient texts that predate most of recorded history. And according to Hindu cosmology, Varanasi isn't just old, it's eternal. It exists outside the cycle of creation and destruction that governs the universe. Which means if you die here, something extraordinary happens to your soul. Let me tell you about Ramesh Gupta. Ramesh was 78, a retired mathematics teacher from Mumbai. In March 2023, doctors told him he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less. He didn't go to hospice. He didn't start chemotherapy. He bought a one-way train ticket to Varanasi. He spent his last 47 days in a place called Mukti Bhawan, which translates to Salvation House. It's exactly what it sounds like. A hotel where people check in to die. When Ramesh passed in his sleep on a Tuesday morning, his family didn't mourn. They burst into celebration. Tears of joy, prayers of gratitude. Because in that moment, according to Hindu belief, Ramesh achieved moksha, instant liberation from samsara, the endless cycle of death and rebirth. No more lives to live. No more suffering to endure. Just eternal peace. For Hindus who believe in reincarnation, this is the ultimate goal. You could live 1,000 lifetimes trying to achieve moksha through good deeds and spiritual practice. Or you could die in Varanasi and get it immediately. It's like finding a cheat code to enlightenment. But here's where it gets darker. Not everyone who wants to die here actually gets that privilege. Mukti Bhawan, the most famous death hotel in Varanasi, has only 12 rooms. 12. And there's a waiting list. The rules are strict. You can only stay 15 days. If you don't die at that time, you have to leave. They need the room for someone else. Let me tell you about Bhagavati Devi. In August 2019, this 82-year-old grandmother of 6 arrived at Mukti Bhawan. She was weak, struggling to breathe, convinced her time had come. She spent 14 days there, praying, waiting, surrounded by family. On day 14, she woke up feeling better, stronger. The manager knocked on her door that afternoon. "I'm sorry," he said, "but your time is up." Bhagavati Devi left Mukti Bhawan in tears. Not because she was dying, because she wasn't. She felt rejected by death itself. She returned to her village, devastated, feeling like she'd failed at the one thing that mattered most. Imagine being told you're not sick enough to be allowed to die where you've dreamed of dying your whole life. And here's the thing, she's not alone. Dr. Anil Kumar published a study in the Indian Journal of Palliative Care in 2021 that tracked 200 residents of Mukti Bhawans. 34% of them recovered and left. They came to die. They got better instead. And for many, that felt like a curse, not a blessing. Think about the psychological weight of that. You accepted death, made peace with it, said your goodbyes, and then you don't die. But the death hotels are just the beginning. What happens at the burning ghats is something most of the world has never seen and will never forget. Picture this. It's 6 a.m. The sun rises over the Ganges, painting the water gold and orange. Smoke blankets the stone steps of Manikarnika Ghat, the holiest cremation site in Varanasi. The smell hits you first. Sandalwood, incense, and underneath it all, the unmistakable scent of burning flesh. Bodies wrapped in bright orange and red cloth are carried on bamboo stretchers through narrow alleyways. Family members chant, drums beat, and 50 feet away, tourists sit at riverside cafes, sipping chai and eating breakfast. This is Manikarnika Ghat, and the fire here has burned continuously for over 3,500 years. Never extinguished. Not once. It's called the eternal fire, and it's the most coveted flame on earth. But here's what makes this place even more complex. Only members of the Dom caste can light funeral pyres here. It's a hereditary right, passed down father to son for millennia. In India's caste system, Doms are traditionally considered untouchables, the lowest social class. They're avoided in daily life, excluded from temples, treated as impure. But at Manikarnika Ghat, they're the gatekeepers to heaven. They control passage to the afterlife. Without their fire, there's no moksha. The irony is brutal. The most untouchable people hold the most sacred power. And it's expensive. A single cremation costs between 3,000 and 15,000 rupees. That's roughly $35 to $180. What is expensive? Sandalwood, the premium option that's believed to purify the soul, can cost even more. Poor families sometimes can't afford enough wood, so the body doesn't burn completely, and what's left gets pushed into the Ganges. Partially burned remains, floating downriver. Let me tell you about Jagdish Dam. He's 45 years old, 8th generation of cremation workers. He's burned over 100,000 bodies in his lifetime. That's 15 to 20 per day, every single day, since he was a teenager. He's never left Varanasi, never taken a vacation, never considered another career. People fear what I do, he told me. They don't want to touch me outside this place. But I give them freedom. Without me, there's no moksha. My hands are the last thing between them and God. But there's a cost most people don't talk about. A 2020 environmental study by IIT Kanpur found that Manikarnika Ghat releases 8.8 tons of CO2 per day. That's equivalent to 1,900 cars running continuously, 24/7. And that's just one ghat. There are 87 ghats in Varanasi. About a dozen are used for cremation. But it's not just the environmental cost that's shocking. There's a group of people who are forbidden for being cremated here, and the reason will break your heart. Not everyone gets burned. There's a list, a forbidden list. People whose bodies, according to ancient tradition, cannot be cremated on the ghats. Children under 10, pregnant women, sadhus, holy men who've renounced worldly life, leprosy patients, people who died from snake bites. Why? Because these souls are already considered pure. They don't need moksha. They're already liberated. So their bodies aren't burned. They're tied to stones and sunk directly into the Ganges. In 2018, after heavy monsoon flooding, something horrifying happened. 58 bodies surfaced downstream, mostly children. The government tried to call them ancient remains of archaeological artifacts disturbed by the flood. Locals knew the truth. These were recent dead, sunk in the river, now exposed. Human rights activists call it a public health crisis. Priests call it a sacred tradition. The debate is tearing the city apart. And then there's what tourists don't see, the underground economy built on death. Varanasi's death industry generates an estimated $300 million annually. Think about that. Death is a business here. Would merchants make 8 to 12 crore rupees per year, over $1 million selling firewood to grieving families? Priests charge for rituals. Body transport services compete for customers. Mukti Bhawan hotels have booking agents. And then there's the most controversial part, death tourism. Companies now offer packages $2,500 for foreigners to witness cremations up close. They advertise VIP viewing platforms, authentic Indian death experiences. In 2022, residents protested. They stood on the ghats holding signs that said, Our grief is not your entertainment. Let me tell you about Anjali Sharma. She's a 34-year-old documentary photographer from Delhi. In 2021, she came to Varanasi to capture what she called authentic India. She stood on a ghat with her camera, ready to photograph a cremation. A young man, maybe 30 years old, was preparing to burn. His mother was wailing, collapsing into the arms of family members, beating her chest. Anjali raised her camera, focused. Her finger hovered over the shutter button, and then she stopped. I realized, she told me later, that I was treating someone's worst day like it was a National Geographic assignment. I was turning trauma into content. She left without taking a single photo. I went looking for spirituality, she said. I found exploitation mine included. But despite all the controversy, despite the ethical minefields and the environmental costs, one thing is undeniable. Varanasi is changing people's relationship with death itself. Here's something that doesn't make sense at first. Western society spends billions of dollars on therapy, medications, and treatments helping people avoid thinking about death. We hide it. We sanitize it. We lock it away in hospitals and funeral homes. Varanasi does the exact opposite. It puts death center stage, makes it public, unavoidable. And the result? People are less afraid. Dr. Meera Khanna published a study in the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology in 2023. She compared death anxiety levels across different Indian cities. Residents of Varanasi scored 68% lower on death anxiety scales than urban Indians living elsewhere. Think about what that means. People who see death every single day, who walk past burning bodies to get groceries, who smell cremation smoke with their morning tea, are significantly less terrified of dying. When death isn't hidden, when you see it as a normal part of life, something shifts. It stops being this unthinkable monster. It becomes normal. Let me give you a comparison. Margaret, 71, lives in California. She's never seen a dead body except at 2 closed-casket funerals. She can't discuss death without crying. She's made no end-of-life plans. Her family has no idea what she wants. When she eventually dies, her family will be traumatized, unprepared. Kamala, 69, has lived in Varanasi her whole life. She planned her cremation when she was 55. Her family knows exactly what she wants. She's at peace. She radiates calm when talking about death, not because she's braver, but because she's had 69 years of exposure therapy. Maybe the celebration isn't really about death itself. Maybe it's about having 80 years to accept it's coming. And palliative care doctors are starting to pay attention. Researchers from around the world now study Varanasi's model, asking, how can a public relationship with death reduce family trauma? How can familiarity with mortality improve end-of-life care? The answers might transform how hospitals and hospices operate everywhere. But Varanasi in 2025 isn't the Varanasi of 1025, and that's creating an impossible conflict. Electric crematoriums are being built across Varanasi. They're faster, cleaner, and cheaper than traditional open pyres. The government is pushing them hard. They want to ban open cremations by 2030 as part of a massive Ganges, but only 23% of families use electric cremation. The other 77% still choose traditional pyres. Why? Because priests argue and millions believe that electric cremation can't grant moksha. The soul needs open flame, sacred fire, the Ganges. Without those elements, death in Varanasi is just death anywhere else. But here's the other side. Pollution studies show the Ganges of Varanasi has fecal coliform levels 3,000% above safe limits. The river is toxic, partly from industrial waste, partly from sewage, and partly from partially burned bodies. So you have spiritual salvation on one side, public health on the other. Ancient rites versus modern needs. Who decides? I met Rahul, 26 years old. He's a third-generation Dom, training to take over his family's cremation business. But he's also studying environmental science at Banaras Hindu University. I love my heritage, he told me. I'm proud of what my family does. But I've also seen what we're doing to the river. I've seen the pollution data. He paused, looked out at the Ganges. Something has to change. I just don't know what. And that brings us to the question no one wants to answer. Here's the paradox. Varanasi celebrates death so beautifully, so publicly, so peacefully, that it might be killing the very river that makes that death sacred. The city's spiritual power depends on the purity of the Ganges, but the practices that honor that purity are slowly destroying it. So the question becomes, is a tradition worth preserving if it destroys the environment it depends on? It's easy to judge from the outside, to say, obviously they should modernize. Obviously, they should use electric cremation. But before you do, remember every culture has death traditions outsiders find strange. Americans embalm bodies with formaldehyde and bury them in concrete vaults, poisoning groundwater for decades. Tibetans practice sky burial, leaving bodies on mountaintops for vultures. Indonesians exhume their ancestors, clean the bones, and live with mummified relatives. We all try to make death mean something. Varanasi just does it out loud. Maybe the real lesson isn't about cremation or rivers or 3,500-year-old fires. Maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe the only way to truly live without fear of death is to know exactly what you believe happens when you die. Not what you hope happens, not what you've been told might happen, but what you believe in your bones is true. And whether you think reincarnation is real or not, whether you think moksha exists or not, the people of Varanasi have something most of us don't. Certainty. They know where they're going. They know what they're working toward. And that certainty, real or imagined, gives them peace. So here's my question for you. If you could choose exactly where and how you die and plan it 20 years in advance, would you? Would knowing make you less afraid? Or would it make every single day feel heavier, more precious, more urgent? Tell me in the comments, not where you'd want to die, but whether knowing would change how you live. And if this made you rethink something you thought you understood,